G'day everybody, how are you going today? It is so good to see you. Today I am joining you to talk about the definition of a professional photographer. Someone just asked me in the comments recently, well, what is the definition of a professional photographer? And look, I do feel that that term is thrown around and used a little too loosely in this day and age. So photography is an industry that's gone through a great deal of change over the last 20 years. Literally 20 years ago, the majority of photographers were still working with film. And then we had this massive ramp into the digital phase, which was probably at its peak around 2010, which saw the industry absolutely flooded with photographers. I say that with respect, but suddenly there were people who were photographers who weren't literally the day before. I think now as we go into the 2020s, the next decade, with the industry contracting, the bubble has burst. We now, I think more important than ever, the definition of a professional photographer is important. And I think people who spend their cold, hard-earned cash should know that if they want a professional photographer, that they're getting one. If they want something else, that's fine, and we can all agree on that too. All right, let's together try and work out what the definition of a professional photographer is. There's no right or wrong here. This is just me starting the conversation. Let's start that conversation. So what is the definition of a professional? Well, let's talk about it. We have professionals like lawyers, doctors, pilots, accountants, computer programmers, graphic designers, so on and so forth. We even have professional athletes. Now they sit in an interesting category. Let's stick a pin on that because they're going to come up later. So when it comes to lawyers, doctors, computer programmers, accountants, so on and so forth, soldiers, truck drivers, so on and so forth. All of these professions have required some degree of training. Whether it's 6 months or 6 years, you've got to train. And at the end of that training, you get a certificate, a doctor, a degree, whatever qualification you get, you have gone through some training to be able to call yourself a professional. So if we're to look at the photographic industry, perhaps the first way we can determine whether someone should be called a professional or not is simply whether they have been trained or not. In this country, you can do 3, 4, or 5 years of a degree in photography. Well, I'd like to think in that time that the school has taught you how to use flashes, how to use different formats of cameras, whether it's 35mm or medium format or even large format. They've even taken you into a darkroom at least once, because the darkroom is a great way of kind of reverse engineering the whole photographic experience. There would be some history, and you would actually understand what shutter, aperture and ISO and how all those things affect each other. So training is important. That is certainly one way we can determine how someone is a professional photographer. I think another way that we can do it is the good old adage, if you do 10,000 hours of anything, then you are an expert. So let's say photography, you're doing 10 hours a day and you do 1,000 days. That's 10,000 hours. Now 1,000 days is around 3 years, 3.5 years, but you're not working every day. So let's call it 5 years. So 5 years of pretty intense photographing, that's sort of working 5 days a week, would get you your 10,000 hours. Now the reason that I think that that 10,000 hours is fair is because in the first 5 or so years of my career, I certainly wasn't rushing out to call myself a professional photographer because I hadn't done the hard yards yet. There were still situations that I had never seen before. That 10,000 hours is about putting you into difficult spots. It's about making you learn on the fly. It's about the school of hard knocks. Because if you're not going to go to uni to work out how to do it, well, You've got to do it in the real world. You've got to go through every situation that you could ever possibly face, and you've got to have solved it. You've got to have worked out how to get through to the other side of it. That's what that 10,000 hours is all about. And we've seen that it's only 5 years if you're doing it pretty intensively. Well, from my personal experience, I think that's a really fair number. If you want to call yourself a professional, another option, if you don't have a degree or some form of training, formal training, is to have done that 10,000 hours. You want to call yourself a professional. So that means you want to be able to be on a location or in a studio where perhaps it's costing $25,000 or $50,000 a day to have the production up and running. And you're going to have your talent, you're going to have makeup artists and catering and wardrobe and hairstylists, you're going to have props people, you're going to have runners, you're going to have location costs, transportation costs, you might be shooting interstate or overseas. It can be very expensive, these shoots. So you want to be able to be sure that if, for example, you're on a beach and the sun is suddenly changing and the perfect shots appeared and you might only have 2, 5 or 10 minutes to capture this, that you can do it quickly. You don't want to be theorizing. You don't want to be messing around. It costs a lot of money to be there, and all of the pressure and all of the focus is on you. That is what a commercial photography shoot is all about. And not only do you often have to deal with all of that technical side of things, but you're also dealing with the talent. So you have to be a people person. You have to be a director of people and get them to do and create and look like what they're supposed to look like. And those sorts of skills go above and beyond what you would learn at photography school. They are also part of that 10,000 hours. So it's critical when you're on a professional paid gig, which is on location. And for me, it's often lifestyle stuff, as in here, you're taking a photo for a bank or a housing company and you're saying, this is how people live. Do you want to have this life too? And so we're trying to find the perfect moment. And the perfect moments are often in very small amounts of time at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. And as a photographer, you've just got to pull it off. And you've got to be able to solve problems. Things don't always go the way that you want them to go, and you've got to be able to adapt and adapt on the fly. So it's critical as a photographer that you can handle any situation. It might be a change in lighting. It might be a loss of one of your talent. It might be bad weather. It can be that a location is suddenly not available anymore. There's so many things that can happen. And those 10,000 hours, they're there for giving you the skills to be able to work through whatever's thrown at you. That's what it's all about. You've seen it before, you're not flustered. There's a massive budget. That's okay, you just keep rolling with it. Number three. Well, number three can be pretty straightforward, and that is that basically you are a working photographer. You are deriving all of, or the majority of your income from photography, whether it's photographic services, taking shots, or whether it's selling your images as originals on walls or in books or in calendars. Personally, I do both of those things because photographers need to not get their income from one place, I think. I think you need to spread it around as much as possible in this day and age. So if photography is the majority of your income, I think that is another metric. I think maybe if you've been doing it for a couple of years, photography is not an easy thing. So if you've been making a living from photography for a couple of years, you've certainly got the skills and you're able to perform and deliver. That's a great metric. There is, from my perspective, nothing more powerful than somebody parting with their cold hard cash because they love what you do and you've succeeded and given them what they want. That is a great measure of success. So they are the three ways: going to school, going to college, university, doing your 10,000 hours, however you've done that, or you are making your living out of photography and you've been doing it for a little while. One thing that is across all of those three ways, one thing that's critical and super important about being a professional is the equipment. Now, I am not talking about having the latest Z7, A7S III, or Canon R5. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that if you are on an oil rig and you are 3 hours chopper flying at $5,000 an hour from the shore, a professional camera shop, or you're up a mountain 6 hours drive from a professional camera shop, and you're shooting, you need to have redundancy. Now, redundancy is critical. You can lose a camera for a whole lot of reasons. It simply doesn't have to be camera failure. It could be that your assistant trips and drops it. It could be that you drop it. It could be that you're on a slippery rock shooting at the beach and you slip and the whole thing goes in the salt water. And it could be a situation like I had about 18 months ago where my camera had been in for a service and it was just slightly out of focus, and luckily I had two bodies and an assistant. Having an assistant is another part of redundancy. I was able to send my assistant to the place that had serviced the camera. They gave me a loan camera. Whilst my assistant was gone, I was able to continue to shoot. So this was redundancy, different redundancies working to solve the problem. Very important, the shoot was able to go on. Nothing changed. Everything worked perfectly. So from the shoot's perspective, the production was not slowed down, money was not wasted. And that's what a production wants. You don't want to stop for an hour because that costs a lot of money. Not only is it bodies that you need redundancy on, but it's also your lenses. You need to have a bit of a crossover or just to be sure that, you know, if you're kind of working on a specific lens, going for a specific look, you need some form of redundancy, even if it's not exactly the same. I think that's pretty critical. Because again, if you're 6 hours from help, the shoot is over. That is not going to be considered, the client will not consider that a professional outcome if they have to just wrap their shoot because you don't have another body or you don't have another lens. Absolutely critical. And it should be the same with flashes and things like that. Things that are critical to the shoot. Make sure you have a professional level, a professional standard of equipment. Critical. I just wanted to go back to the professional athletes because in a way they're a bit like photographers. They can suddenly become a professional at age 18 or 19, out of college, out of university. They suddenly have a professional wage. They're getting all their income from what they're doing. But they have also done another thing. For you to come straight out of university or college, high school, into that sort of gig, you've probably been doing that sport for the previous 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So you've done a great deal of training. Professional athletes can be similar to photographers, and the definition could be similar, which is you've done a mix of training, the school of hard knocks, and then you start to get paid, and it's the majority of your income. There we have it. That is my outlook on what it might be to be able to call yourself a professional photographer. Now, this is not a definitive opinion. I'm not trying to say that. I think everybody's going to have a slightly different take on what this is. What I'm doing today here is I'm just opening the conversation, and I would love to hear from you. Where do you think the definition of professional begins? I'd love to hear that from you. This is not me saying this is how it is. There is permutations and variables and definitely stuff that may well exist in my blind spot. So let's talk about it. If this is your first time here, thank you so much. It is lovely to meet you. I'd love to see you again, so please subscribe. Please share. Please like, and if you'd like to see over 200 episodes right now, you can just look down there and watch a whole lot more. All right, see ya.